I feel like my anxiety has been at an all-time high.
Mm.
And this prep for next week, reading a book, hint, hint, it's going to be very good. But it's also triggering.
Oh, boy. The book that I'm about to borrow from you and read.
Which I intended to have done today, but I cannot sit down and read it for like hours at a time. I have to like stand up and take a deep breath and be like, Jamie, you're not 24 years old anymore. You are 36 and your life is great. And you don't need to revert to those feelings anymore.
Relatable.
Right? Yeah. So just a little talk about mental health here for a minute.
I feel that. I've been there. First of all, book-wise, I have been having the same feelings about All the Colors of the Dark, which I have not made much progress on because it genuinely scares me. And I don't do good with spooky stuff. Spooky stuff meaning like actually scary thriller of like there's a murderer of young girls in the woods and this young girl goes to find him by herself and I'm just like I feel my blood pressure rising and I'm like, it's not an enjoyable feeling for me.
Yeah.
So I've also been struggling to go back to that, similar to the book you've been reading. And I've also been having similar feelings of you are not that young version of yourself anymore. Which we can get into, but I wanted to say, and maybe this, I don't know if this will help you, but I was really trying to practice gratitude in the car on the way here, because I was having, also just like a rough morning and not feeling good, and then I was like, oh my God, the weather has finally broken. It's that beautiful crisp fall air, and it's sunny, and we're gonna have many days of this, and like I was just trying to like feel the sun and try to be grateful. Like I'm driving to my bookstore to do a podcast with my friend and we have a great time. This is such a wonderful thing that I get to do. And I have this life that I love. And like, it's very hard.
Yeah.
It's hard to stay grateful.
I'm just like leaking.
I know. I feel that. But I feel like that's what I do when I'm in that spot is I just think about gratitude and like, I have to consciously remind myself all the time to be grateful.
Yes.
But then it really helps.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And we have so much to be grateful for. Like,
we're grateful we're not 24-year-olds making terrible mistakes.
Yes.
Or 18-year-olds.
Yes. That's very true. Jacob has an interview tomorrow. So I'm a little anxious for him. I'm seriously just.
It's okay.
I can't make it stop. It's just happening.
Yeah.
So we have to like get his interview outfit. And like, he's 18 years old. He can do this on his own. But I'm like, just
You're absorbing that.
I'm supportive. Yeah.
Yes.
The supportive anxiety for him. And Rowan has a homecoming dance on Saturday that he's going to. My kids have never been interested in participating in school dances or any kind of communal thing like that. So now we have to go for a homecoming outfit too. And he's going with a group of friends. He's got a great group of friends.
Yeah.
He's a junior in high school. He seems to be excited about it.
That's so cute.
Right? But
now
now
you're
I
just
have
anxious for him about.
Well, I'm not. I know he's going to be fine. But now it's just like we got to go shopping and just all these things on my list that weren't on my list yesterday, but are now like, oh, I have to do a lot of things this week.
A little bit overwhelmed too, then in there with the anxiety.
Yeah. Maybe a little bit.
Yep. Maybe we're having a little bit of the fall, like the come down.
But we should talk about the weather a little bit because it is beautiful outside.
I know.
And we've been waiting so long.
I know. I got to put my sweatshirt on today. And wear my Birks with socks, which I'm pretty excited about. And I wouldn't normally do in public, but I'm going to the gym after this, so who cares?
Nice.
Yeah, I love it.
And the sun is out. And yesterday we had all those storms. And I love the storms too. I sleep so good when it storms. So I got a couple of good nights sleep.
That's good.
Yeah.
That makes one of us because
I know.
the storms keep me up at night. But mostly because I have these huge trees near my house, one of which is like halfway fallen over and is already touching my garage. And these storms coming through, I'm just like, oh, my garage is going to get smooshed.
So nothing has happened with that branch yet?
No. the whole tree is.
This was months ago.
Yeah. No, it's just slowly leaning more and more. But we're talking to people. My other neighbor is talking to my other neighbor, and we're all kind of assessing the situation. So I think no one wants to pay to have a tree removed.
Right.
Especially me, even though it's falling onto my garage, but it's not
your tree.
Yeah, it's like definitely not my tree. So fine. That's like one of those things that keeps me up at night, though.
Right.
Now it's like an extra thing in the storm where I'm like, I can't just enjoy this, which
Yeah.
I really would. But you also have your nice basement bedroom to like
hide in when it's storming.
and you will be safe down there no matter what.
Yeah.
I do not feel that way.
Welcome to Book Pop.
Welcome to Book Pop,
where we talk about life and books.
Yeah, and reading and business sometimes.
Mm-hmm. And just our general mental health.
Yeah, mental health is important.
It is very important. So anybody else going through it, you're not alone.
That's right.
And then we also had a topic that I picked out today pretty casually, thinking it would be a fun discussion. But then as I started researching, it is not like, it's deep. It's deeper than I thought I would go. And I feel like I have to go that deep because it's an important talk. And it kind of piggybacks on our book ban talk. And it relates to overall our favorite books that we read in school and what books got us interested in reading and what books we fell in love with from high school. But it kind of took a turn into like what's being taught in high schools now and the importance of what books are being taught and how they're being taught and who's teaching them.
And who's deciding what's being taught.
Who's deciding what's being taught. Mm-hmm. So I went into a rabbit hole of sorts thinking about this topic.
Well, cool. Let's get into it. I'm excited to hear what you have read about.
Well, first, let me ask you, what's the one book that you remember reading in high school that was like pivotal for you?
Yeah, this was a tough assignment for me when you were like, let's look back at our childhoods and teen years at what we read, because I have the memory of a goldfish. And it's helped me create systems in my life where I write everything down because I have to, because I don't remember things. But I was like, it's not something like specific things don't stand out to me like that. However, I do have a very visual memory, and I can picture like my English classroom and where my desk was in orientation to everything else in the room, and what the teacher looked like and what his voice sounded like. But then I could not come up with the name of these teachers or of what the books were specifically that we read. But luckily, I had my 20-year high school reunion this weekend.
Woo woo.
Which I won't get into other than to say I did have one really great conversation with a classmate who reminded me of what our English teachers' names were and what some of the books were that we read. And I was like, okay, yeah. I remember that vaguely. I remember that.
I'm impressed that they remembered. I had to go into my yearbook and try and recognize the faces of the teachers.
Okay, so that occurred to me, and I was like, I don't even know if I have my yearbooks. Maybe they're at my parents' house, but I don't think I have them at my house. So at least you have them.
Yeah, I do, yeah.
So, okay, I'm trying to think of one book. That was your question. What's one book that you really remember reading and having an impact on you? And we've already talked about Night by Elie Wiesel, although I do specifically remember reading that book for the first time in high school. I will tell you one book that definitely made an impact on me that I read in high school, and it made an impact because I just hated it. And it was something that everyone revered and was talking about, like, you have to like this book. And I was like, oh my God, what's wrong with me that I did not like The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger?
Mm-hmm.
I was like, I don't get it. I did not relate. I thought it was like dated and male centric view of the world. And I obviously I don't remember specifically how it was being taught.
Right.
But what I remember is not helping.
Yeah.
Right. Like I was like trying to find the value in it and just being like, no, I don't get it. And I also read so much outside of school that it was kind of one of those perfect examples of me being like, I hate school books and I love fun books, or I love like the ones that I pick out, and I hate all the ones that my teachers pick. And that was like the big feeling that I remember, is never liking the ones that I was assigned as part of English class in middle school and high school, and thinking like, well, I don't get, like, is it me, or is it like that we have to, that's why they force us to read these, is because you would never pick this up normally to read it because it's so bad. Like, I don't get it. I don't get why the books that I'm being forced to read are so much less enjoyable than the ones that I pick out. And the things I was picking out to read at the time were, like mysteries, I guess, and YA fantasy. I didn't read Harry Potter till I was in college, so it wasn't even stuff like that. But other, like the Divergent books, I think were out maybe when I was in high school or college. Like dystopian stuff. I read a lot of dystopian. So like the ones that I did like would be like 1984. I loved all the dystopian things.
Yeah.
And I really looked forward to those. But then there would be these quote unquote classics that I just didn't get.
I loved The Catcher in the Rye, and that was taught in school. And I 100% think the way I related to it was because of the way it was taught by my teacher.
Interesting.
Because Holden Caulfield is spoiled, stuck up, arrogant little shit.
Yes.
And that's how he was taught to me. And we like picked apart that character so much that it gave me more understanding of the story, and also understanding that J.D. Salinger is human and flawed, and his flaws are in his writing. And I think that was actually one of the books that made me, I don't know, love reading and love classics, love literature, is looking at it from the way that it was taught to me, which makes like teachers so pivotal in our English classes when it comes to what is being taught in those classes and how it's being taught.
I think that's such a great point, and that's fascinating that we both had like this pivotal reading experience
with the same book,
with the same book in
completely
opposite
different
directions, and we're both still, really big readers. I honestly think it might also have to do with my personal taste of not liking books that have unlikable narrators and unlikable lead characters. I feel like I have such an emotional stake in the books that I read, and that I absorb them in this way that if it's an anxiety-ridden narrator, then my anxiety goes to 10. And if it is an asshole kid, I just like want to push him off a cliff or whatever. Like I just don't know. It's hard for me to separate out the looking at it objectively as like a piece of literature if I'm just like, but it's so unlikable, or so maybe that's a part of it, is my own personal taste.
I completely know how you feel, but I'm realizing now that I always will gravitate towards an unlikable, unreliable main character.
I feel like Yellowface by R.F. Kuang is one we've talked about recently that you read that a lot of people didn't like. I think part of because of the reason I'm talking about, but that you still really liked. And a lot of people, I mean, it's a very well revered book.
Right.
But it has this very unlikable lead character who's making
that I
terrible
hated
mistakes.
so much that I loved the book.
Yes. Yeah, that's fascinating. So there could be some personal taste in there too, and not just how it was taught.
Yeah.
And I don't want to like say that my English teachers weren't good at teaching it, because they probably were, and I think it just missed me.
Yeah.
But that's fascinating.
one book that I was taught in high school that I didn't like in high school, but I read later in a college course about women's literature specifically, and I loved it, was The Color Purple.
Mm.
And I think a lot of that has to do with I went to high school in a small rural Wisconsin town, and teaching and learning those tough issues about race in a time that I wasn't connected to, and not really understanding that these books are not written in a vacuum. Like, there was a time and a place that this was how our society was, and the voice that was a general, I don't want to say general voice because that's a bad example for The Color Purple, because it's a very specific voice, but it just wasn't taught in a way that I could connect to it, and more or less made me uncomfortable in high school until I had a greater understanding in college and can look at it through different eyes with more knowledge and just more cultural intuitiveness, I guess.
And was the professor in college also probably more worldly and
Absolutely.
had that kind of cultural? Yeah. So it also was the environment,
Yes.
not only your growth, but like the environment change for you. And
Absolutely.
fascinating.
Right?
I feel like The Color Purple is a great example of like, that's a tough read for any high schooler to, because it has so many challenging aspects of like, it's a different time period that we aren't familiar with and don't have a lot of exposure to it by that age. It's different cultures in terms of race and sexuality and different. It's like, it's got a lot of, it's very intersectional and it's so beautiful. And the characters are so gorgeously painted that you can
really
just like see them and hear them. And so the writing is so beautiful and the story is so great. But it also has a lot of like hardship in it too. So it's like it's challenging in that way. So I feel like that's one of those that I don't know that it was on my high school curriculum. And I think similarly about Toni Morrison, where I took a class in college at UW-Madison that was a whole semester of reading Toni Morrison.
Love it.
And I had never read her before. So it must not have been on my high school curriculum either. I feel like I remember hearing about Beloved and seeing about Beloved when I was in high school, but I'm pretty sure I didn't read it till college. Or maybe it was one of those like optional, you know, how you had, sometimes there was like, okay, you get to pick now of these classics, which one you read. And maybe I just didn't pick it, but it was one of the options in high school. But when I read it in college and I read Jazz and The Bluest Eye and a couple others as well, all in this one semester with someone guiding you and really showing you why this is great, why it's important, and then looking at them together side by side and the growth of an author, the shift in their own perspectives, like I found it, and like the different moods they can have and the different types of books they can write. I thought that was so impactful. And I remember thinking like, oh, I'm really glad I didn't read Beloved in high school because I would have had this like different preset view of it. And it's really interesting when you say you read The Color Purple in high school and then you read it again for the college class. I'm surprised you were like, I feel like if I had just read it in high school, I'd have been like, already read it. I wouldn't read it again.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Did you?
Well, I think it's because I didn't engage with it
as
much in high school.
So you were like giving it another
Absolutely.
chance.
And that was like my first, the summer I started summer semester, and it was like my first college class. And I was like, I'm doing this.
Sure. Yeah.
So I was very invested in the course all around.
I feel like I didn't reread things.
Interesting.
From high school later, because I was like, I already read that.
Yeah. I also had quite the gap between high school.
That's true. It was a little further away.
So.
And maybe you were changed enough then that it felt like revisiting it made more sense.
Yeah.
Whereas like an 18-year-old who's a freshman in college is
reading
like,
it a year later.
Yeah. Interesting. Although we should get into To Kill a Mockingbird a little bit.
Yeah.
If we're going to, because I was in that play in high school.
Oh.
And I played, what's her name? The girl who pretends that she was raped.
Oh.
But
in high school.
In high school. I mean, we did full Shakespeare plays in high school. I was Helena in A Midsummer's Night Dream when I was 17 years old. And I memorized an entire part. We had
my high school in comparison.
Yeah, let's go.
I believe it was my junior year. The production was Shrek.
I mean, there's nothing wrong
comedy.
with Shrek.
No, it was love Shrek.
Yeah.
It was great. It was funny. I think my classmates did a fabulous job, but that's heavy.
Oh, it got real. We had a real drama teacher who influenced my entire life. Tara Affolter was so fabulous, and our drama club vibes were very intense. In like we were all devoted to her, and she did not pull punches. She did not she was like, "Yeah, you guys are doing Shakespeare."
Wow.
I don't think these were like abridged Shakespeare's for kids. Like this was like real ass Shakespeare. And then we did To Kill a Mockingbird. We did One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and I was Nurse Ratched when I was 15.
Okay, you have mentioned that to me before. I need to see pictures of that though.
Oh yeah. This was like very hardcore, I would say, and we were all really, really into it. However, we were the only school that didn't do musicals.
Yeah.
Which was a big bummer for me because that was right in the center of my Venn diagram of interests was singing and acting. But since we did have this really great theater program, I was like, well, I'm still going to do that. Mm-hmm. And then I did show choir, and then I did community theater musicals. But anyway, so that's why I wanted to bring up To Kill a Mockingbird. Is my experience with it was very personal.
Yeah.
From playing a part. And so I also like reread the book before we did that. I don't think that was a part of like that year's English class, but I just reread the book. And then as you're reading the play and you're practicing the play and you're watching it, you just dig into those details and into the emotions of these characters because you have to act them out. And again, we had this fabulous teacher who is really dissecting it with us and challenging us in terms of how to think about race. And this was like 2002,
right?
You know, like it was a fabulous program, that theater program. So To Kill a Mockingbird really means a lot to me because I have that deep emotionally earned connection from having to play one of the really problematic characters.
Yes. You mentioned how just dissecting a book along with somebody can make such a or make more meaning in a book than you could have on your own.
100%.
And I think I do that today with
this podcast.
Well, no.
Because that's how I use this. Oh yeah.
I mean, let's
and
talk
with customers and with,
absolutely.
Yeah.
But like, if I start a book that I'm not getting hooked on, I'll go and listen to a podcast about it, or read an interview about the author, or get in their head a little bit and try and understand what they're trying to get through with this writing, which is just like definitely something I learned from high school and in just those English classes. And I think that drives to the point of learning or reading books in English class and alongside a teacher. And it's a life lesson that obviously we use today. Very much so.
And guided, it's not even just dissecting it with another person, which we love to do. And like, you or I or our customers at the store might not have any more information, but we still have different perspectives. And even that level of hashing it out of like, how did you interpret this thing?
Absolutely.
What did you think about this? I felt weird about that, or I really liked this part, can bring up something for someone else. But then to have the added level of like an intelligent person who's already really thought about this and done research on it, and like a professor or a teacher who has actual insight to offer and to show you, can really open up that pathway in your brain, like you're saying, of now I know how to understand text.
Right.
Reading comprehension just starts going up and up and up because you're not just absorbing words, you are absorbing ideas and you're seeing layers.
Right.
Someone to dissect all the layers to help show you they're there. And then when you read something else, you're like, oh, there's probably layers in here that I could go poke around at and pull apart the way that my teacher taught me with these other examples. So I do think that that's part of why there are some classics that really stand the test of time in that they are easily dissectable.
Yeah.
And they have those like clear cut layers that like a younger brain can see and actually witness being pulled apart, and then they can use that knowledge in the future. So I'm kind of realizing that in real time of like, because one of my things coming into this was, why are all these classes still teaching
the same
books?
Yes.
How many great books come out every freaking Tuesday? And we lament constantly that we will never get to all these books. And then I'm like, why are kids still reading Catcher in the Rye then? And maybe there is a great reason. And I'm going to get a lot of hate from Catcher in the Rye fans about like, oh yeah, everyone should read this. But there's a lot of other great books everyone should read. And I get it. I mean, so I get it with To Kill a Mockingbird. Like I said, I have a deeper connection to that text. Yeah. I'm sure there are similar reasons. And I totally give the benefit of the doubt to Catcher in the Rye of like why that's important. It's just something I didn't personally connect with. But maybe like thinking about these titles, and like I was saying, they have maybe more clear-cut layers to dissect. I feel like To Kill a Mockingbird does have these really, it's like also juicy, right? In terms of discussion and in terms of interpretation and in terms of the different conflicts that are all happening in the storyline. But then it also has these like clear-cut morality questions. And I feel like really good literature for a young brain can do all of that, but in a way that still has a plot that moves along and can hold them. So maybe there aren't as many great examples of current literature or of literature since some of those books were written in the last 50 years.
Yeah.
That would do all of those things as well. And also teach about history and also teach about race in I guess, a time that was very different from our own, but maybe is still relevant today, right? I feel like that is doing a lot. Those books do a lot. And that's why they are classics, is because they were able to check so many boxes and do so many things and create such a place in our mind. And part of it, and like, that's why Shakespeare, I think, is relatable still to this day and why people still talk about Shakespeare. Is because it's these classic, it's like tropes. It was almost like the invention of certain tropes that are still, they're never going to go out of style. They're modernized and but love triangles and farce and hidden identity. And like it's just these really great examples of this. So I feel like it's probably a similar thing. And I get why classics are classics. I do think it's really cool to think about mixing in more modern literature to show the difference, or maybe just to try and hit kids from different angles with it. Okay.
So along that line, what do you think should be taught in English classes today in high school?
Okay. I really tried to think about this and I've been struggling. Especially since just talking about it with you right now, and I'm like realizing what like the bar is so high.
Yeah.
And you only have so many opportunities of books you can force kids to read before they're out of high school, and you can't really force them to read anything. And many adults just don't.
Right.
Right. And so if this is like your one chance to grab people, to me, like I said, I would want a little bit more. Some of the modern classics, I think, could absolutely hold up to the scrutiny of an English teacher and also be a little bit more engaging for a modern kid to read. Okay, so with that all being said, the book that comes to mind first when I think about something modern and challenging and multi-layered and dystopian and satirical, but says something about race and society, I think of Chain Gang All-Stars by Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah. It is, I don't know if I've talked about it on the podcast before.
I think it was one of your 5-star reads.
I was going to say, maybe like first episode I
Yeah.
talked about it because I was like, I have to get this off my chest. It is one of the best books I have read on all of those criteria that I just listed in terms of what I've read recently. It is a not too distant future and pretty easily imaginable future in which the American prison system has been privatized and they have created a reality show situation in which prisoners can opt in to fight to their deaths, but there will be one person that survives and is freed at like the end of the season. And the prison conditions have deteriorated to the point that it kind of forces people to want, like, this is their only chance because their life is in prison is so miserable. And that's kind of part of the scheme. Mm-hmm. But it is about the exploitation of class. It is about prisons and about how we treat people who have made mistakes. It is about redemption, and each of these characters has these incredible arcs. The writing style is so diverse. Like each character, it's from a lot of different perspectives, and it's flipping around between these perspectives of like these two female Black characters who are in a sexual relationship and who are also at the top of the game in terms of this reality show. They are warrior women. They are tattooed in the product sponsors, which is a way that they can buy. So there's this other level of satire and commentary, social commentary, where literally people are getting sponsors tattooed on their bodies as part of their deal because that gets them more food and more resources in this game. So it's like a dystopian Hunger Games situation, except that it is set in America like today.
Yeah.
And is this class, race commentary that also just has the most memorable, beautiful characters. And if I read that when I was in high school, I think I would be radicalized and like, maybe that's a bad way to say it. Because I don't want to say like, and now I read it and I don't give a shit. I absolutely give a shit.
Yeah.
But I think even on a brain that has not considered those things, it would be mind blowing. I guess that's my point.
Yeah.
I think it would be even more impactful on a young brain in a great way. And the story is so good and the characters are so good that you can't put it down. It is challenging and graphic and violent. And I believe that that's something that people should learn to engage with in literature because that's part of life. And that's also something that we should learn how to read about and think about. Like when we see bombings on the news and we see like the war in the Middle East escalating like it is right now. And we need to be able to picture that and relate to it and humanize it. And this really humanizes that violence and all of the constructs around American society in terms of prison and punishment. Mm-hmm. It's like a modern day Crime and Punishment, I guess, is like a way to think of it too. And I just think it's so important of a book and that it should absolutely be
incredibly
thought
thought-provoking and
probably, okay, like I can admit maybe it should be senior AP English in high school. I don't think it should be taught in middle school.
Yeah.
But I think it is up there and is a modern classic.
Mm-hmm. I love it. I think that's a great choice.
Thank you.
I went nonfiction.
I love that.
I chose All About Love by Bell Hooks because
Did you finish it?
I finished it. And this was the book that I was, quote unquote, meditating on because I would read a chapter and then put it down for a week and spend a week ruminating on it. And the chapters are all about, love with your partner, love with your family, spiritual love, and our societal love. So it's an overarching idea of love that is in everything you do. And I mean, this is not new. This book was, when did this come out? 2000. I think I've always said that in our schools, we teach math, we teach English, we teach sex ed, but we don't teach relationships. And if there was a class on just having relationships with your partner, with your family, with the people around you. It would be such a great class for people for high school students, particularly
just
to
for
have.
like emotional IQ class.
Exactly.
Of like how to be in the world with other people.
Yes. And she just does such an eloquent job of putting together research, just her own experiences, her own childhood, their anecdotes about her personal relationships. And I got a lot out of it.
That's a great one. And I do think English class is as close to we have as like an emotional how to live in the world, and like you get the teaching, right?
Yes.
Because you get the experience of witnessing and jumping into other worlds and other people's perspectives, at least. And then you have to talk about them and you have to say what you agree and what you disagree with. But it still is a little bit at arm's length. What do you think about nonfiction in general in terms of a curriculum? I'm just having this brainstorm right now thinking, I wonder if we all gravitate towards fiction and we can read fiction a little bit more clearly because we were taught to do that. And I was never taught to read nonfiction.
Very true. I don't remember reading any nonfiction other than our textbooks.
And here's a hot take. Do we read nonfiction less critically because whenever we read it, we kind of take it as fact?
Oh.
But these are just authors who often are not.
Right. Well, and I also think
sourcing, things appropriately.
Yes, absolutely.
And have their own perspective and their own opinions they are inserting.
Right. It was just a book bought by your school to teach you.
Well, but okay, so yes, for textbooks.
Yes.
And for nonfiction like published today, like a memoir.
Yeah.
Or like even a social science book that is out there. Like let's take and think of a good example. Well, okay, I'll give you an example in my own life. The book Freakonomics.
Oh, yeah.
This came out in the early 2000s and was a huge smash hit, and I was obsessed with it. I was like kind of an econ poli-sci major, and I was really nerdy about stuff like that, where it would be like a pseudo-science-y, like social science, where you can look at behavioral patterns, right? Like I took a lot of like behavioral psychology classes and thinking about how people make decisions in their lives. And Freakonomics was like funny and cutting edge and had all these examples of, like, okay, this school district that did this experiment with like school lunches and it had this unexpected result. It was like a version of like a clickbait.
Yeah.
A bunch of clickbait articles, but it was the year like 2002. So we didn't have clickbait articles. It was like, but it was all of those in a book. And I was obsessed with it. And I listened to this other podcast.
That just pulled it apart.
Oh. Okay, I have to give a shout out to this podcast. It's called If Books Could Kill.
Yes.
And it is hilarious. And it is brutal in that they look at nonfiction books and they rip them apart. They go and they actually do full research on the subjects that people have written a book about that is very famous, but usually has very little research behind it. For example, like The Secret. They did a really hilarious episode on The Secret. And the first episode they ever did was on Freakonomics. And I was like, oh no.
They're coming after you.
And it is from this very well-researched perspective, and also pointing out, they're just digging into the author's background in a way that I didn't.
Right.
I didn't interrogate any of this when I was first reading Freakonomics. I didn't interrogate what the motivations behind an author are. And I think it's pretty easy to think about the motivations behind like a textbook author, and we still take that as fact.
Right.
And textbooks are wrong all the time too. And certainly dated, even if they are best intentioned, they don't know everything. And how well are these really researched? And it is just fascinating to me to think about nonfiction as a thing that we don't interrogate enough and question the intentions behind the author.
I absolutely agree.
And I think Bell Hooks is a great example of a nonfiction author where engaging with it at a young age would be so helpful and thoughtful. And there's also a lot of nonfiction authors that would probably be really confusing to engage with at a young age, where you were like, oh, this is fact, this is true, especially if it's like about a subject, or like certain history books, or I don't know, like a self-help book too, right? Where they a lot of what they rip apart in If Books Could Kill are self-help books. Just be like, that's not actually what science says you should do. But yeah, I think something like 4,000 Weeks by Oliver Berkman, which I love, that might have really screwed me up in high school. I don't know. I could have gone really emo. So anyway, those are my random thoughts on nonfiction.
Yeah, I think maybe high schoolers should be taught on how to question things, not just in books, but
yes,
all around them.
Well, it's a great summary. And that makes me want to give a shout out to my brother, who is a middle school social studies teacher, and
Nick Fish.
And he was talking to me recently about one of the things he teaches his kids, and it's all about, because in today they're just going to Wikipedia and they take that as fact, or they Google something and Google will give them a suggested answer, AI generated answer, and they take that as fact.
Yeah.
And so he's like, half of my job is just trying to teach them about sourcing and about truth in the modern age.
Good for him.
And how hard that is to stay on top of, because it's always changing right now. And AI in general, he can really go on some rants about AI.
Oh, yeah.
But I think that is the thing that we have to focus on, is how to, even if you can't dig and know the truth, you can at least question someone else's version of the truth that they are trying to feed to you as, gospel truth.
Yeah.
So I think teachers do have really an uphill battle these days. It's not just books.
Right.
It's not just books that we have to question. It's everything that we are being fed we have to question.
I agree. Do you want to talk about what we're reading now?
Sure. What are you reading?
Well, I finished Matt Haig's The Life Impossible, which just came out this month.
Oh, I'm so jealous. I want to read it so bad. Wait, was it good?
Yes, it was. Okay, so first of all, I didn't read Midnight Library.
Oh, okay.
This was my first Matt Haig.
Okay.
And I was excited that he came out with something new, because I felt like I heard so much about Midnight Library that I wasn't even excited to read it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't excited to read it anymore. So this gave me an opportunity to dig in with like a fresh perspective. And it was so good. It follows, what's her name? It's like something, Grace Winters is the lady who it follows. And it starts with this email being written by one of her former students who's like not in a great place in life. And he's like, I'm just checking in to see how you get through hard times. And she's like, do I have a story for you? So then the whole book is like her telling the story of what happened after her son died and her husband died, and she's alone, and she ends up being given a house in Ibiza by a long lost friend who she hasn't seen in years, who used to work with her and she was kind to this one time, leaves her this inheritance of a house, and she's like, I'll go check it out. So
what else do I have to lose?
Right.
Oh my God.
So she gets a one-way ticket to Ibiza, and it's this like ramshackled house, but then she finds out that her friend has disappeared under mysterious circumstances. So she starts asking questions about that. And it becomes this mystery that is kind of surrounded around the natural magic of the world, and this idea that it might not be magic if we just don't know what it is. It's just like this element that we don't know what it is, so we call it magic and make it seem fake. But really it's something we don't understand. So it's this magic that she comes into contact with, and she starts to understand it. And it has tropes of like climate change and saving our environment and doing things that are environmentally responsible and fighting against things that aren't. So there's this protest that's happening, and they're fighting against this billionaire who wants to destroy this really special part of the ocean, and it's layered, it's fun, it's emotional. Yeah, it's very, very cute and very satisfying.
That sounds a lot like Midnight Library. That's
Yeah.
the vibes. And I think it got a lot of popularity because of that. Like there's like a coziness almost, even though it's kind of trying to say something
in this voice
deep.
of this older woman. You're just like, tell me a story. And
Yeah, I love that. I'm excited to read that. I loved Midnight Library.
Yeah.
But I also feel like it got some critically it wasn't as popular because of the coziness.
Sure.
But like, okay, coziness is, let me give you a quick synopsis of Midnight Library, okay? By Matt Haig. A girl in London is depressed and has lost a lot of her stuff too. Like she's lost a lot in her life, but she's younger. She's like late 20s or something. And she has like she's not in touch with her brother anymore. She used to be in a band and they all broke up because like her brother was in that band too. She's lost all of her friends and she just lost her job. And she kills herself at the beginning, but instead of dying, goes into this magical purgatory world called the Midnight Library, where all the books on the infinite walls are different possibilities of what her life could have been.
Wow.
And she gets to just pick one and pop into it. And then she wakes up and she's in this other version of her life. Like, what if I had stayed in that band? Or what if that band had gotten famous? And she's always looking. So she's just like popping into these lives. And she's always looking for, am I still depressed in this life? She's looking at her arms for like cut scars.
Yeah.
She's looking in her medicine cabinet in the life for antidepressants. And then she'll open it and just be disappointed. Like, oh, well, I guess I don't want to live this life because I'm depressed in this life too. Even though she's like rich and famous.
Yeah.
She still is depressed is what she's realizing. In all of these versions of her life, all of these problems, no matter how good or bad this version of the life is, like objectively, she still has all of these core things that are going to upset her. And it is about gratitude, right?
Yeah.
At the end of the day is what that book is about. And it's about it doesn't matter what turn your life takes. Like you're still there.
Right.
You can't outrun yourself and your mind. Like you are still in it. And no matter where you are in the world, you go, there you are. Right. So it's really about that, but it's kind of this meandering, interesting journey. And I really liked it. And I think, it really speaks to people with depression to me, and depression and anxiety in general. So I thought it was really heartfelt. But despite that setup of like she literally kills herself right away. Maybe we should say spoiler alert a little bit at the beginning, but it's an old book, so and it happens at the beginning. It's very cozy. And it's always hard for me to just sell people it in the store. I think it's funny when people are like, I've heard so much about this. Is it good? And I'm like, it's great.
I'm going to leave it there.
They're like, oh yeah, it's not too challenging, right? And I have to be like, well, trigger warning.
Yeah.
Actually, there are some trigger warnings that come with it is maybe the way to think of it. Even though it isn't too challenging outside of that, like where it's going to be a tough read.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Okay.
That's the Midnight Library. So I think it sounds really similar in that you find along the way that like there's a lot of sadness at the setup. And then
it's about gratitude.
It's about gratitude and a new way of like finding joy for yourself.
Absolutely.
From a really different perspective though, of like an older woman versus a younger woman. And he's a man.
He's a man.
And he's writing these female
interesting
protagonists. Very interesting.
What are you reading?
Well,
all the Colors of the Dark. You want to talk about that?
Barely reading All the Colors of the Dark because I have to read it with my hands over my eyes. So it makes it go really slowly because I can't see all the words because I'm too scared. I am reading that, but I also read for the purposes of this podcast because I knew we were going to be talking about like classics and books we read in school. One of the books, or I guess one of the authors I read when I was young that I really loved was Jane Austen. And I think we probably read Pride and Prejudice or one of them in English class.
Yeah.
Again,
don't remember.
Can't say for sure. Can't say for sure. But I was, at the time, my favorite two movies were Emma, starring Gwyneth Paltrow, and Clueless, which is an Emma adaptation, starring Alicia Silverstone and set in the 90s.
Love Clueless.
So what I decided to read for this episode was a book called Emmett, which is a brand new queer YA retelling of Emma. Very similar to Clueless, except everybody's gay.
Okay.
But it's like the same setting of like a rich California high school, like a private school. And they are, so like, it's very like opulent in terms of the parties and the shopping, and they're doing fun stuff like that. And the lead character, Emmett Woodhouse, is a male gay version of Emma Woodhouse who's trying to matchmake his friends. And I love classic adaptations when you really love the classic, because you get to just, like, as I'm reading it, I'm like, ooh, I wonder what this character is going to show up as in this book.
Yeah.
Right? There's like another level of enjoyment when you know what the reference material is.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, I'm excited to see what they do with this twist, because they really did change it around. The person that normally he gives like a quote unquote makeover to, which is, the main part of the story, is he's trying to like matchmake this person who's kind of less socially adept than him, and like he's trying to give them a makeover, and he's actually hooking up with this person in Emmett, and is like, well, but I don't want to be in a relationship, which is a very famous like Emma Woodhouse characteristic, is she didn't want to get married herself. She was trying to like make other people get married. But they did such a good job of updating it to have like modern twists on that. So he still had like a mother who had died, and part of why he doesn't want to be in a relationship is because he sees how heartbroken his dad is all the time. And he's like, well, I don't ever want to be heartbroken like that.
Yeah.
Because his dad's really struggling throughout this book, and he's kind of like burying himself and his own grief of his mom dying in this matchmaking. And I feel like it actually was a little bit more emotionally investigating some of the motivations behind the character.
Okay.
Like Jane Austen the writing is so clever and clippy, like the dialogue is so great and the quotes are still relevant today. But I feel like it was like a little more surface level in terms of thinking about, or maybe it was just more obvious of like why Emma Woodhouse would not want to get married. She was kind of like this confident, she was there with her dad and just wanted things to stay the same.
Yeah.
And had this great life and this great relationship and had never felt love. And that kind of was like self-evident, and you didn't really interrogate it. Whereas like this actually dove into his own motivations for this. And he has the neighbor across the street who's like family to him, but who has not come out as gay. And so it's just like someone who he's had a crush on. And it's like kind of the stepbrother situation, which is what Paul Rudd's character was in Clueless. And they're just like flirty and this really sweet, like family level deep friendship. But he just thinks, well, there's no chance with that person because they're like probably not gay.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to pine after some straight guy, and I don't want to be in a relationship anyway, right? So they just kind of develop, and then the neighbor comes out, and then it kind of like escalates from there. But again, it's like, how it's going to end, what all the characters are going to do, and kind of who ends up with who because of knowing the reference material.
Yeah.
But I just loved it even more because it was like YA. The writing was YA.
Yeah.
It's simple. The sentences are simple. But I read it all in one night. Also, because it is YA. And so you can like chug through it. And because I was just like having so much fun. It was like I sat down and watched Clueless, but like a really great queer version of Clueless, which I was like, oh my God, if they made a movie of this, it would be so good.
Cute.
The characters were really great. So I just loved it. And I love an Emma adaptation. It's one of my favorite stories. Emmett by L.C. Rosen, which is out now and available at the store.
Cute.
I had like other follow-up questions about like how you read in high school and stuff, but
We talked a shit ton about it.
Well, I had questions like, did you ever not read the book?
Oh, yes.
And then you watched the movie or something instead?
Yes, I'm sure.
Did you ever do Cliff Notes?
Probably. I mean, I know what it is. My more formative time reading was like 5th grade, 4th and 5th grade, and 8th grade. Because I remember my 8th grade English teacher, Mr. Schuster, like he was so encouraging about reading and writing as well. And then in 4th and 5th grade, like the entire grades would form teams of 4. And then you would be given these reading lists. And you divided the books up among your 4 teammates. And then you had so many weeks to read your books that you were assigned. You did like a Jeopardy match. And you answered questions about all these books. And you had to buzz in. Whoever
and then you
read
had
the
your
book
whole team. Oh, my God.
to figure out what book it was.
That's so fun.
To answer the question. And my team, both 4th and 5th grade, won.
Okay.
So I was like, well, I'm a reader now.
I love that. What a great activity.
It was super fun. I remember it being a ton of fun.
I would do that now.
Right?
That sounds so fun. It's kind of like literary trivia.
Exactly.
But you know ahead of time what books they're going to ask you about, so you can
you read them
and
like, yeah, you just know
have
the characters.
So
and,
yeah. Oh my God. I love that.
I can't remember what it was called. It was something fun and catchy, but
That's super cool.
right?
My formative reading memory from like 6th grade, I'd probably 6th, 7th, 5th, maybe 5th, was biking by myself to the Penny Library on the east side.
Yeah.
Which is like kind of far away from my house, but it's right on the bike path.
Yeah.
So I could take the bike path there, and then I would just so I would do that after school and then just like hang out and take home books. And mostly what I was reading at the time was this mystery series called the Cat Who series. And these were like adult cozy mysteries, but it was all about like a cat that like there was like a cat detective, but it was more like it was a regular detective who lived in a lighthouse, and he had this cat that was really smart and who helped him find the clues.
Cute.
And I was like obsessed with this series. So I would just go like read a different one, and they were short enough. I think I could just read one where I would like in that.
Yeah.
And not even check it out. I just read it at the
Right
library.
at the library, yeah.
Or I would check out one and go home. So like I really remember biking to that library by myself and hanging out. And I remember what the bike path looked like at the time. And Michael's Frozen Custard was right there. So I would stop there sometimes. And then I would go home.
Cute.
So that's again, like I was much more on the independent side of like what I wanted to read and when I wanted to read.
Yeah.
I wasn't really engaging, I think, as much with what was assigned to me to read.
And I feel like that's normal. And unfortunately, when you're being forced to read something, you're not as excited to do it.
That's why that game sounds like such a good idea.
Right.
The Jeopardy trivia decathlon.
Yeah, because then we got to pick whatever books we wanted to read on that list.
Yeah, there's
it
some
wasn't
agency in it.
Exactly.
Because you're choosing something.
Yeah, that's true.
That was always my favorite part of English class was when they were like, okay, for the last book of the semester, you get to choose between these 5 books. And I would be like, oh, great. I get to go like look at them. And maybe that was the early signs of I like browsing and shopping for books.
Yes. And if you want to browse and shop for books,
you can do so right here at Lake City Books or lakecitybooks.com. We ship. Have we mentioned that we ship?
I don't think we have.
Oh my God. You have to cut this out and put it at the beginning of the episode. We ship all across the U.S. now. So if you want to get a book that you are listening to and you are somewhere in the U.S.,
and you want to support
a
bookstore,
small independent bookstore run by 2 ladies who you love to listen to talk about books, you can support us by ordering books through us.
All right. Anything else?
I think we covered it.
I think we did too. All right. We'll see you at the bookstore.
Bye.
Bye.
Book Pop Podcast is presented by Lake City Books. Produced by Jamie Anderson and Molly Fish. Edited by Jamie Anderson. Music and art by Lovick. Follow us on Instagram at bookpop.podcast. Find out more at our website, bookpoppodcast.com.